Hello, today we are going to talk about the new technologies of the photovoltaic. So what I'm going to talk about is directly stolen from the EPVF, so it's a French Institute of Photovoltaic, and it's inspired by, well, it's exactly the course given by Miss Schneider the 8th of January. And it lasted 6 hours, so I think I'm going to skip some things in order to go not very in depth, but give things that I think are important, and also things I mastered and not really what I did not really understood. And maybe I will split the video in multiple parts because it might last many hours. I have 132 slides, so it might not be possible to reach the end. So at first we'll see the objectives of the photovoltaics. So EPVF is an institute that has a lot of components. So it has silicon technologies, thin layers technologies, new stuff, and two parts, one for modelizing with computer and one part with economy and environment. And all of this makes their lab, so it's really good. So in terms of consumption, we can see that we consume a lot more these years. So it's mainly due to the poorest part of the world that have access to the energy. So like Africa and Asia, that increase their consumption. And in terms of CO2, we can see that coal, oil, and natural gas are still very how do I say it? Very important because they release a lot of CO2. And obviously, the solar technology does not emit CO2. Well, this is false because a bit later we will see the mechanisms to synthesis silicon, well, a variety of silicon, and it releases a tiny bit of CO2, and you have also to consider the transport, but we'll see that later. So at first the solar resource, so the sun unlights the globe at a certain enlightenment. We can see that in the poles the enlightenment is very limited. In France we usually say it's 100 watts per square meter, and you can see that near the equator, it's maximized due to the fact that even though the Earth is tilted, in average, the part that is the most unlighted by the sun is around here. Well, I think it's around here, but there is also the desert. So okay, there are deserts. We can think that maybe it will be good to place solar panels in the desert, but it's actually a bad idea because the panels needs to be at low temperature, and it's not the case in the desert. So at first it is a very abundant resource. You could technically power a lot of the human technology with it. You can use on the roofs and the roads, and in France it could be a very good opportunity because we can install it very quickly. One of the problem is that in terms of time it's non-constant. During the day there are clouds, and the intensity of the enlightenment is not the same. Monthly you will have a peak in summer, but not really in winter, and even through years you can have a fluctuating intensity of the enlightenment. So the solar spectrum, so the sun emits something that is really close to what's the name? Boltzmann law, one of the Boltzmann law. So it's some kind of curve like this that peaks at a low wavelength and then diminish slightly. So you can calculate it. Yeah, it's a Boltzmann law. Yeah, the Boltzmann law is something like the wavelength in micrometer is equal to 2989 divided by the temperature in Kelvin. Then you can see that there are little weird things. It's the absorption of some elements, so dioxygen, and water, and there are also a lot of elements. So as you can see, the spectrum is a bit weird with this weird shape of like a chainsaw, and the visible wavelength is around here. So we can think at first the first solar panels were gathering the energy around here, and now with the research we are getting all the spectrum to the panels. We also remind the energy of a photon. It's equal to hc over lambda, and we can calculate it very quickly. Okay, so there are a few technologies of the solar conversion. So the biofuel, so it's everything with photosynthesis. The thermal and heat production, so it can involve the panel that use water as a flow, and the sun radiates on it and it goes back to the home. And there are also another kind of thermal heat production called the thermodynamical plants. So it looks like this. You have lots of mirrors that are concentrated in a single spot, and it can go to really high temperature, and you have a special fluid that is used to gather energy. And finally, the topic of this presentation is the photovoltaic. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So the history, at first we had an electrochemical cell by Becquerel. Then however, it was not really about the light. It was just a notice in a paper that he remarked that when the cell was under the light, it could generate more energy. The real solar cell is the one by Adam and Day, which was specifically designed to be under the light. Then we have the first cell using silicon. So silicon is one of the highest, is one of the more frequent material that you can find in the ground, alongside with dioxygen in the deep layers of the ground. So we might not get rid of it, and basically it's sand. So with sand you can build the panel. So the first one was in what was this one. Then there was industrial production for satellites. Then it became cheaper and cheaper. The production greatly increased. So the first thin film cells means a different technology than this. So later we'll see that there are technologies with silicium and ones with thin films. And we can see that the PV capacity is greatly increasing over the years. This schemes is one I tweeted recently. It's a document by NREL. It represents the efficiency among the years. So what is the most common is the blue one. So the blue one here means the crystalline Si cells. And the other are pretty much research only. So you can see that you can reach a lot of you have new technology that might come up. For example, you can see that this one is already above the thin film technologies. So it's kind of complicated. Yeah, there is also this one that is used sometime in the industry, but I'm not going to talk about it yet. So there are three types of PV applications. So the autonomous systems that work on themselves, buildings. So it's inside the residential or commercial, or plants that are connected to the grid. So the autonomous systems, so they can work on themselves. It used to work on small calculators. It can work on very isolated sites. So I'm not going to go too much in this detail, but what you have in residential grid is usually a panel, an inverter, so in French, non-onduleur, a device that regulates the charge, so it's called a régulateur de charge, and the battery. And you can also supply it to the grid or use it for your home for home power. It's sometimes convenient to put it on commercial parts because you can't see them, and it produces a lot of electricity. You can also build them directly on the surfaces. So for example, I think this is the Berlin Central Station, in which there are thin layer deposition in the top, and even though it has a bad efficiency, the light also goes through, so it's a kind of an aesthetical problem, and it works. So and recently Tesla announced that they had reached 22 to 24 efficiency range with a really design photovoltaic tiles, but yet we have no data on this. They didn't publish anything these days, so we don't know. So there are also great plants that produce a lot of electricity in the desert, like in Chile, or in Korea. So as I said earlier, the efficiency increase when you are at lower temperature. So building it on the river is very good because the water cools down the panel, so it's great. And you can also have the panels directly on a plane or in the street. So for the grid, you can have a sum of this. So the PV panel will have modules and bypass diodes. So bypass diodes will mean when one of the module is shadowed, it will the current might go reverse, meaning that the other module that are unlit will use the shadowed panel as a charge, and the bypass diodes will prevent it by using the energy produced directly into heat, and this means that the energy would be lost. There are systems of balance, so charge controller, storage cables, converter, so DC to DC to adapt the tension, and the inverter, so onduler, and mounting frames. And finally, you can output either to your AC loads, so like the usual stuff. DC loads, this is a bit rarer because usually you don't use DC outputs or directly to the grid. So the solar cell is a single cell. It's very small. A module is an assembly of solar cells. So usually have a lot in them. And when you have lots of modules, you do panels. And when you have the panels, you have a solar plant. So this is a graph that is the path of the sun among the year. So here is January, December. You can see that so this represents the angle of height. So the higher it is, the higher it is in the sky. So in January it's very low, and in July it's very high in the sky. And you can see that when it's below, it means that you are not unlit by the sun. And then obviously you can see that in January, December you have low amount of sun, while in July you have now you can define some formulas, but it's not really interesting. So before 2006, the production was usually for their own continent. However, there was a crisis around here. China bought a lot of industries in the photovoltaic and became leader very, very soon, and produced a lot for all the other continents. And Europe is the main buyer of this technology. And even though here we have almost every time the part that produce is the part that buy, it's not the case now. I'm going to skip that slide. So you can see here the perspectives. So in 2011, that was the production of the energies as different technologies and different progressions. And you can see that so you have, this is a bad for environment, medium for environment, and high for environment. You can see that even in bad projection, the part in solar photovoltaic is increasing, which is great. In terms of the world, so you have usually the Europe, that is a great actor, Japan, China, and very surprising, the Chile is Chile is a very strong actor despite its low density. So congrats to them. Okay. So now let's talk about technologies. So the crystalline silicon is the one that is the most used. It represents 91% of the world market. The thin film, so usually the cadmium TE, cadmium TE, CDT, or CIGS. So the thin film technologies are the ones made by deposition, and the crystalline ones are made by crystallizing the cell. You can notice that these companies here are made in China, so that explains a bit why they are top of the market. Recycling. So in Europe, there are regulation about recycling the PV modules. So we will talk about it later in the analysis of the life cycle. Okay. So recycling is very important. There are 96% of the panel that is recycled. Recently, a new site has been constructed by Veolia, but before we used to recycle in Belgium. For example, in Japan, there is no specific regulation for PV modules. So the challenge are to get cheaper panels, to have better ones, to have the ones that are better fit with consumer needs, and stable ones. Okay, now let's do a bit of physics. So when an electron, when a photon enters the material, it has energy that is quantified, so it's quantum physics. It reaches from an occupied level to a non-occupied level, and there is an energy called the energy of gap. And there are three main things to consider in the solar cell operation. So the generation of carriers due to light absorption, the separation of carriers, the collection of carriers at terminals. Okay, so at first, a metal does not have a distinct conduction band and valence band. They are both in the same part, so electrons are free to go from this part to this part, and the electrons can move freely in the metal. When you have an insulator, the band gap is really important, and the electrons are usually stuck with their atoms. A semiconductor has a small band gap, and you can see that there are electrons that are in the conduction band, and you have electrons that are not here in the valence band. So you have rare presence of the electrons in the conduction band and high presence of the valence band. Now let's talk about carriers, charge carriers. So they are in a Fermi-Dirac distribution, being E the energy, and this curve being the Fermi-Dirac distribution. So it's a statistical distribution. We usually have a variance, so EC and EV, and we can see that in a metal you have the electrons can go have a very high variance. So even though they have a mean, they can go very wide in terms of energy. While for a semiconductor, the gap is really small, but the electron can go in the two sides. So when it's here, the Fermi-Dirac is very close to the lower layers. So for an intrinsic material, the mobile electrons are the density of mobile electron is the density of mobile holes, because what it means is the material already has holes in it, in opposition to extrinsic materials that have carriers that are added by the human. So you can for example increase the conductivity. So the charge carriers, when you have doping, So you can either add the impurity or it being already in it. So when you dope, you are in an extrinsic material, and otherwise you are an intrinsic material. So for example, here we have a matrix of silicium, and we replaced one of the silicium by phosphorus, and it means that there will be a negative carrier that is added to the matrix, and you will get a N doping, so donor. And if you replace the Si by a Bohr, you will have a negative charge and a plus, and this plus is called a hole, a mobile hole. So it does not represent something negatively. It does not really represent something in reality. However, you can view it as an anti-electron. Why? Because in material engineering, even though the electron is not something that exists, you can't see it, it means that it represents a charge locally that is higher. So like if there was some kind of antiparticle of electron, and it's not a positron. You do not you should not make you should not say that it's a positron, because it's not. It represents that on average there is something that exists, so we consider that it exists. Okay. Now let's talk about the gap. So if the photon energy is lower than the gap, nothing happens, the photon goes through. If the energy of the photon is equal to the energy of the gap, there is excitation, so from this to this, and it's perfect. That's what we want. But what often happens if the energy of the photon is higher than the energy of the gap. So imagine you have a layer of energy here. The energy will go from here, so in the other band, and then decrease in energy, and this decreasing in energy is basically the thermal relaxation. And what can also happen is that the thermal relaxation of a neighbor will pass it from here to here. So there is also transport, but I'm not going to talk about it much. It's the fact that the carriers also in a certain direction by the Fick's law, but I'm not going to talk about it much. So there's also loss mechanisms. So when in the semiconductor, when you have a solar panel, there are three mechanisms that can occur that determines the carrier lifetime and the diffusion length. So the first one is the radiative recombination. So when you have a top electron and a lower electron, they will recombine into a photon, so they will emit light. There is the Auger recombination. So when you have an electron, a down and a up, the up will give his energy to another up. The up will go higher, and the down will go down. And finally, the Shockley-Red Hall, so SRH recombination, occurs when you have an electron trapped in defect stasis. So it's a bit more advanced, but I'm not going to talk much about this one. But it's a lot of mechanisms that are involved. So basically here that explains the fact that you have a p region, the p region, n region, and a space charge region. And it will generate a current when you have a photon, because when there will be a photon, it will create an E field, an electric field that will generate a current. So obviously it should work only in one sense of currents. There are lots of mechanisms that are involved. So here you can see the drifting, the diffusion, and everything with the arrows. Under illumination, so the charge move as described by the arrows, and you have a generation of an electron hole pair. So the hole is called H+ usually. And you have a current that is created. So to evaluate the performance, we build the curve I in function of V. So you can recognize that in the dark you have the characteristic curve of a diode, so LED, DEL, I don't know the acronym, DEL, so something like that goes like this. And when it's unlit, you have this kind of curve that looks like this expression from the material engineering, and it will be very helpful to have this curve later. So you can do a modelization of the cell. So the cell on itself will be all of these things. So at first a generator of tension, a diode that will limit the sense of flow of the electrons, a resistance that is called the shunt resistance, SHUNT, and the series resistance. And you can see that we used to build the different characteristic curves. So at first we can notice that the derivative in U is equal to 0 here is equal to the inverse of the shunt resistor, so the slope here. And otherwise we can see that the derivative when I is equal to 0 is equal to the inverse of the series resistance. What else? So usually like in every field of engineering we have some conversion efficiency. So I'm not going to do the questions. So here we can see that there is a maximum intensity called the short circuit intensity, a max intensity that is the intensity max for the a certain power, and max tension that is called the open circuit tension and the max tension. So what's important is the form factor, that is the area of the big rectangle divided by the area of the small rectangle. Okay, so usually you can do simulation. So there are standard criteria for evaluating solar panels. For example, AM115 is a reference for the inclination, the tilt of the panel, and a certain enlightenment. Then, okay, so now we will talk about external quantum efficiency. So it's the thing that is on this axis, and here on this axis you have the wavelength, and here the photon energy. So it represents the energy that is gathered depending on the wavelength by the panel, and obviously you will have a theoretical limit depending on the material choice. Okay, that's all. Okay, so now let's talk about the SQL, so not the language of the programming language, the Shockley-Kayser limit. So you can see on this graph that what's on yellow is the energy that is not absorbed in terms of percentage. This part is thermalized. Then this part here is lost as collected. This part is re-emitted. And what you actually gather is the part that is converted. And it has been proved by Shockley-Kessler that the maximum efficiency for this panel will be 33%. However, we've seen earlier that the efficiency could reach values that are higher than 33%, and we might see it later. I will explain why we can overcome this limit and how we did it. So you can see that depending on the choice of material you take as a semiconductor, you can have a various range of spectral responses. Usually we take the gap value of 1 or 1.5 electron volt. There can also happen that there are parasitic optical losses. Yeah. So the production in terms of the market, it's mainly polycrystalline silicium, monocrystalline silicium, and thin films. Okay, so now let's talk about the silicium. So the silicium has a structure that is very like the one of the diamond. So usually we call it a cubic diamond structure. So this diagram is a bit weird. So on this axis you have the energy, and on this axis you have the momentum. So for the silicium we call it indirect because the center of this curve is not the same as the center of this curve. That's about it, and it's direct when both the center are on the same momentum. And the energy here is the energy of gap. So for the recombination, the silicium has a low emissivity. So the only type of recombination that will occur are Auger and SRH. Okay, now how does it work to synthesize the silicon? So at first you have something called silicium quartzite, in French silice. So it's a rock that is taken from the ground. Then you have a furnace that is pretty much the equivalent of the ones you can find in metallurgy. So basically you heat really high. So the temperature of fusion of the silicium is 1500 degrees Celsius. So you put it in the furnace and you can extract it metallurgical Si. So once you have this, you can split it. For example, this will also be used for electronics to build a semiconductor for the COMSI people. Then there is a process called the Siemens process to grow rods of polycrystalline silicium. Then there are a few processes. So the Czochralski process. So basically, what you can see is some kind of weird shade that looks like a poop. So what you do is you put a big rod of polycrystalline Si and you make it heat, and on the top you will have a monocrystalline root, and what will happen is when you heat, the top will heat and will get unorganized, but when the top will cool down, it will organize with the same crystal as the one you've added on the top. So when it cools down, it will gather the same structure as the one that is slightly higher. The one that is here will have the same structure as the one that is higher. The one that is here will have the same structure as the one that is higher. The one that is here will have the same one that is higher. So you have a cooling down that is very important. So the cooldown will be very important. You need to cool down what is the one that is close to the crystal, and then go from near to near, and then you can cut it into wafers. Same goes for polycrystalline ingot. So wafer are basically you sew the polycrystal, and you get a wafer. So the electrode arc furnace is the one that you can typically find in everything of metallurgy. So you have carbon, you have silice, so it's oxide of silicium. You make it heat with a temperature that is higher than the temperature of fusion of the silicium. So a lot of things happen. You recover the energy, and you have your silicon. Okay. Now, the manufacturing of the silicons, we have a Siemens reactor. So we have a quartz frame, silicon rods, and the graphite electrodes. So it's kind of complicated, but basically what you do is you put the silicium, and you will have some kind of purification called the Siemens process, using hydroxide of chlorine, and it will purify of all the things. So you will have MgSi plus HCl that will get this. So this is a gas, and then you do a step of distillation, and with dihydrogen you will grow silicium on rods, and you will have HCl that is useful for CVD. So this is what a big tower of Siemens process looks like. Okay, there are other methods. Oh, okay, so this is the Czochralski that I was talking about. I forgot that there was a slide about it. So here you have a seed of the crystal. You have and as you cool down, the crystal will take the structure of the seed that is higher. So by implementing this seed, that is something that you add by yourself to the silicium, when you will cool down, it will take the same structure as the top one. There is also this process, but I don't know exactly how it works. It's some kind of doping gas. Oh yeah, I forgot to say, in this Czochralski, you can add doping gas in your semiconductor. So depending on what you want, you can add it directly, and it will directly go inside the matrix of the material. So to go from polyrod to polyingot, you just melt it, and you can have also directional solidification. Now you must turn the ingots into wafers, so you cut it, and there are also lots of losses due to the fact that you cut. And recently, in the latest year, the kerf were not recycled, and now we use it. We recycle the kerf because it's a lot of the cost. It's 1/3 of the wafer cost. Oh no, the sewing and polishing is 1/3 of the wafer cost, but the kerf can be really significant. So around 50%. Now, so the collection. Once you have your pair of charge carriers, you must collect them. So this is what it looks like. Okay, you can have a certain amount of plus, N plus, P plus, P plus plus. So I'm not going to go back into that. But you have your NP layer, your N plus, P plus, and also the aluminium in order to get the current, so the conductor. So this is what it looks like in terms of energy, depending on the plate. So if you have your N, here you have your P plus. Okay, I'm going to skip that. So the reflection. So when you have a material, part of it will reflect part of the incident photon. So you had an anti-reflection coating, and basically by calculating the coefficients, so the coefficients from Snell-Descartes law, you can calculate this. There is also an aspect of texturization. So you will have some kind of weird shape that is an irregular inverted pyramids that will maximize the part of photons depending on the tilt of the panel. So there is this texture. So this is what polycrystalline looks like. This is what it looks like after applying a coating, an anti-reflective coating. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about this. Oh yeah, when you have a shadow, so for example a leaf that falls on your panel, usually the normal panel will not be unlit because as I've said earlier with the diodes, so the DEL, LED, I don't know, electroluminescent diode, so electroluminescent diode, LED. Yeah, okay, so on regular panels, when you have a shadow in some part of the material, it will not light because this will act as a receiver, while on some new materials like CIS, even if there is a shadow, it works still. Now you can see that the different cells can have different forms. So for example, here you have a square cell, and here you have a long rectangular cell, and you have some kind of monolithical interconnection, so everything is linked between them instead of having small squares. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the interior. So now let's talk about the deposition methods. So this is really interesting for the new technologies. So you have two big families, the chemical process and the physical process. So what is the most done is the CVD, so chemical vapor deposition, and mostly the plasma enhanced chemical vapor deposition. And you have lots of things that is more the research part. You have lots of techniques. Now about the new technologies. So here you have amorphous silicium. So it's a new kind of silicium that is used in simple junction models, or microcrystalline Si that are new technologies. The CDTU, so cadmium something, and CIGS, so copper, indium, gallium, sorry, and selenium. You can see that they have a really small part of importance in the market, the PV market. So they have some kind of gap that is near the electron volt, and they have really closed. So what does this notation means? This means microcrystalline silicium with addition of hydrogen. So what that means is inside the structure you will add hydrogen, and the fact that you add hydrogen is not something you want actually. It's something that is usually done by bad synthesis or just natural synthesis. Well, not really natural, but when you synthesize it, you will have hydrogen that will appear due to the bad parts of the synthesis. Yeah, so this is what it looks like, the H. So basically your structure, your best structure will be like this, but sometimes there will be a nitrogen that will pop up. So you can see here it's 5 to 10% of hydrogen, atomic hydrogen, and the dangling bonds involve high SRH recombination, which is bad. And this is why we use a PIN and not a PN. So we've seen earlier PN junction, so positive negative semiconductor. Now we will use PIN junction that we'll see right after. Okay. So the PIN junction is a part that is an intrinsic semiconductor, and that will do the transition, and it will be needed in some of the new technologies to improve the efficiency. So now let's talk about the plasma enhanced chemical vapor deposition. So usually it's done at very high pressure. I don't know if it's low pressure. I have a doubt whether it's high pressure or low pressure. So basically you have a plasma and you add a bunch of gas, and you will have a synthesis of the radicals that will go right here. So okay, and you can build very new modules. So the challenges are mostly in the homogeneity, the efficiency, and the deposition times, because obviously this can take very long, sometimes hours, sometimes days. And you can put it in lots of things. For example, flexible substrates. So with the thin layer systems, you can actually build flexible substrates, which is very cool, and directly inside the glass. So for example, in your window, you could have a PV module. The advantages, so the thin films absorbs low and high intensity light. You need less semiconductor. The high temperature do not significantly reduce performance. However, you have lower efficiency. There is degradation of the material and the sunlight, and the production requires hazardous gases. So the major challenges are to achieve a laboratory scale performance from production modules, and mastering the production of multi-junction devices. So we'll talk about multi-junctions right after. So at first we've seen single junction devices. Okay, so now let's talk about CDT. So this structure is a structure that we'll call the blend in French, so blend, or also cubic TD structure. So it looks like this. So the band gap is 1.4, so it's good for the spectrum. It's a p-type and can be doped. Okay. So this is what it looks like from the side. Here you have the glass, so with the sun goes to the glass. Here you have some layers. You have a very small part of N and a big part of P, and here you have your paste and copper. So this is what it looks like in terms of spatial representation, with on this side the energy. So here you see you have a very low energy, you have a change of parts. So you can see here you have the glass, the CDS and the CDT. So the deposition techniques, you have vacuum methods and non-vacuum methods. So I'm not going to go too much in detail. Maybe the physical vapor deposition, it's one that is the most used. So basically you do a vapor and you evaporate the metal, the structure, and then you have something that is nearly 700 degrees, and you have a sheet that is cooled down, that is at a lower temperature, and it will get solid into this plate. So that's cool. So this is what it looks like. CIGS. So you can see here that depending on what you want, you can use various materials. You can do CU GASE, CU ALSE. You can build lots of different components depending on what you want. So you have kind of the same sandwich structure that occurs. Okay. So you have some kind of very long fabrication process that I'm not going to talk about much, but I think you understand what I mean. So the advantages of the CIGS is that you can tune GA addition to boost absorption even more. It's well matched to the solar spectrum. You have high efficiencies. The disadvantage is the process is expensive, as you've seen in the picture that I skipped, that is very long. Gallium and indium are a scarce metal, so they are very rare. And we might go for new concepts with ultra thin and micro cells. Now let's talk about the PSC, so perovskite solar cell. So the structure is like this one. So I think I had noted somewhere, maybe it's after. Wait, no. It's structure in ABX, ABX3. Yeah, okay, it's right here, ABX3. And basically you have a cation that is in A, metal in B, and X you have other stuff. Okay. Perovskite, so you can either synthesize it in a liquid process or in vacuum process. The advantages is that in 4 years, wait, no, I don't have the diagram. In 4 years, it went from 3% efficiency to 20% efficiency in labs. It's a very low-cost process. So it's like ink printing. Challenges. So yeah, there are problems of unreal performance. You have a phenomenon of hysteresis. So I'm not going to talk about it, but it means that you have some kind of seal phenomenon. It's you want its stability, and you might have substitution by lead. The Guardian recently titled "Perovskites: the future of solar power?" ? Now let's talk about okay, the Schokl-Kaiser limit. So as we've seen earlier, there is a limit that is 33% for a panel, because you can prove that at most there is a 36%, 33%. For example, for the CSI solar cell, only some of the spectrum, so what's in orange here, is actually gathered, while this is all the spectrum that is on the solar energy at the surface of the Earth. So what we can do is do some kind of conversion. So imagine that you have 3 rays, and depending on the wavelength, you can use systems. So here, imagine you have something that absorbs only not the red, so the purple one and the red one. So they both go to the red and get absorbed, and the red keeps going, and then you will add something that will convert the red into green. So it will pass through some kind of converter, then go through the green, and then there will be a mirror, and the mirror will come back and it will reach the green. Okay, now the principle of multi-junction. So this can be applied to directly existing system and can overcome the Schokl-Kaiser limit. Now the principle of multi-junction is that when you use a single panel, you have one panel that should deal with all kind of frequencies, and imagine that this is the big arrow represents the part that is from the sun, and the small arrow represents the excess energy, so the energy that is not gathered. The idea is to use multiple layers of junctions, so multiple panels in series in order to reduce it. So for high energy, you will use one that is special for the high energy that will gather this part. So you will have a very small excess, and then do the same thing with lower energies in order to diminish the excess energy. What I didn't say is that when you have multiple junction, the problem is that when you add them, how do you say, the summing sums the tension, but it takes the intensity of the lowest material of them. So for example, in this material, you will sum the 0,4 of the 3, the 0,6 of the 2, and the 1 of the 1 to get this 2. However, for the intensity, you will get the minimum, so it's the 1 of the 1, so which is 5 of 5J, and oh yeah, it sums out partially, because you have a small area that are multiple times, but it's almost the same. It's very close. You can see that it's not 10 plus 5 plus 7. It's really close to 5, and usually the summing is not straight. So you can see here that it's almost the same as 5. And usually you can compute the integral because you are on a tension and current. So it's the integral is a power, and you want to maximize the power. So you can see that the area of 1 plus 2 plus 3, so this is higher than the intersection of 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I'm going to skip that. So oh wait, no, I can't. Okay, so in terms of material, so you can see that the silicium is here, and some materials are called the 3-5 materials. So it means that they are the ones on the column 3 and the column 5. So when you will build your semiconductor, you will use 3 and 5. So for example, gallium and arsenic, that is very used. And you can do stuff by epitaxy. I'm not going to go too much in detail. And obviously you can put it in a graph and decide what's going on, but I didn't clearly understood what it was. So you can do MBE, molecular beam epitaxy, to build expensive materials. And you can even have fractional stuff depending on what you want. So for example, here you have layers with different composition. So obviously if you multiply this coefficient, and this coefficient by 100, you can see that the proportion of gallium and indium are different, and you can see here on the spectrum. Okay, so it's expensive, and space likes when it's expensive, so it's used for space applications, and you can find it in concentrate light systems, like in the deserts. You can use concentration systems with different lenses. So the Fresnel lenses is a lens that always converges like here. Can also have mirrors that are parabolic or planes. Okay, so LCA means analyse du cycle de vie, in English life cycle analysis. So you will take all the stages of the life of the module and consider it. So this part is a really oriented environment, and it will help decision making for manufacturers. And there are different regulation around it. So for example, in terms of Europe, there is the norm ISO 14044. That is the LCA framework that explains exactly what you need to do the LCA. You have various variables that are considered. So EPBT, energy payback time. So it's the equivalent in terms of year to produce the energy that was used for the production. The GHG, greenhouse gas emission. So it's the equivalent in CO2 of its production. Toxic metal emissions. Okay, and you can compute it using algorithm with computers. Okay. Now, in terms of energy, you can see that there are small differences in terms of carbon. Sorry, give me a. So you can see here the payback time that can be very different depending on the technologies. You can have a different range of EPBT and GHG. What else? Okay, and that's it for this presentation. I hope you liked it. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Bye.